It is natural and healthy for people who share the same values and morals, people who have common bonds, people who look the same, act the same, and think alike, people with a shared ancestry and history and common genetic bonds to come together. And I fail to see why collectivism and coming together as a group is something that should be solely confined to left-wing or liberal politics.
Again, this whole thing with left versus right, that all depends on how you put left and right into context. For me personally, the left is the opposite of the right, and it wouldn't make sense to me to place collectivism on both ends of the scale, left and right, and leave nowhere to place the opposite of that, which is individualism. I suppose again that depends on how you view left and right. I've seen people's chart where they have this sort of square and they try to actually relate libertarianism at the bottom here with the left. There's nothing libertarian about the left. You cannot be a lefty and be libertarian at the same time. You just can't. When you seek to control prices, when you seek to control the economy, when you seek to control individuals' lives, you're doing the opposite of what the meaning of liberty means. For example, I support the liberty of prices in the economy. You probably don't. You probably support government price controls, such as a price control over the minimum wage. Or maybe you support a price control over rent controls, over rent. There's nothing on the left that is libertarian. You cannot be a lefty and be a libertarian at the same time. It's an oxymoron.
Ultimately, we are engaging in a battle to save not only our people, but the whole of Western civilization.
Well, if we look at a collectivist regime such as China, politically collectivist, they have a serious demographic problem, and that's largely because of the Chinese government. This idea that somehow we need collectivism in order to save civilization, you paint this overly simplistic view that collectivism somehow means that we all work together, therefore this is going to prevent all this free flow of immigration. Again, it's a misinformed view. Like I've pointed out before, individualism isn't just as simplistic as saying it's every man for himself. In every socialist regime we've ever seen, like collectivist regime, it's led to the exact opposite of saving civilization. You saw more than 150 million people wiped off the face of this earth, so I really don't know where you're getting that idea from. There's nothing stopping you from having this individualist society where individuals are free to pursue their own economic goals and paths, economically free and independent from the state. They can choose if they freely wish to work in collective groups, but it most certainly does not mean to say that we're for destroying civilization.
And we must win. And to win this battle, we must adopt tactics that will facilitate such a victory. Because believe me, there is no point standing in the ruins of the West, surrounded by foreign hordes, and triumphantly claiming that although we lost, at least we never adopted a tactic that was used successfully by our enemies. I will take this opportunity to draw a small analogy. Imagine if you were engaged in a war, a battle between good and evil.
Excuse me, but you bring up about good and evil, and history really is on our side when we speak of this. And we can talk about imperialism, colonialism, fascism, Nazism, colonialism, it doesn't matter what it is, theocracy, feudalism, communism. All these collectivist systems have proven to be nothing other than evil. Pure evil. And you are trying to justify that. You're trying to tell me that subordinating my individual rights, not even giving me the liberty to choose what I want to do voluntarily, you think that coercion is somehow good and voluntary action is somehow evil. You can't have collectivism without coercion. You just can't. There's no voluntary action involved. You cannot take away my individual rights and liberty to then sit there and say, yeah, you're libertarian. You're not. You're far from it. Your socialism is nothing other than pure evil. You require the use of violence and coercion in order to achieve your collectivist goal. You basically oppose equal rights. You support a system of positive rights, meaning you think that your rights are somehow greater than my rights and I don't have the right to disagree. It's a bit like someone saying people should have the right to a job. Right, okay then. So what about the employer? Does the employer have the right to disagree? Well, you've just taken the right from the employer away from them. You've said that your rights to a job is greater than the right for an employer to disagree. And the difference is that me as an individual, I believe my rights should be equal to your rights, and so long as I don't infringe upon your rights, then you're free to be as an individual. If you want to work in collective groups, that's your own free choice. And right now, all thanks to your collectivism, we are seeing the consequences of those actions in, of course, Venezuela.
So whilst they refuse to use the tactics that empower the communities and groups that the left want to strengthen and use as weapons against the West, they are happy to bind themselves with the terminology of the left, terminology that was ultimately created to stifle debate and promote white guilt. Now, the final objection that people seem to have against collectivism or identity politics is that they claim that the West was built on individualism. Now, this is utter fanciful rubbish. The West was built on families, families that formed communities, communities that came together to form tribes.
Before the Industrial Revolution, we predominantly had collectivism. It's what dominated the world for centuries, even as far back as the Roman Empire. From what we saw in the Industrial Revolution was a dramatic change in living standards. And that was not because of collectivism. That was because of individualism. You would have to be out of your mind to say that it was because of collectivism that led to that. If that was the case, why did the Soviet Union lead in such a disaster? It was one of the most collectivist regimes on the face of the planet. That's no different to the likes of China when it led under strong collectivism. It was no different to that of Venezuela that's living under strong collectivism. You were going on about families. What's that got to do with it? That's not what collectivism means. Collectivism doesn't mean, oh look, here's people working together in collective groups. No. That's not collectivism. Collectivism is something in reference to a system, means that the means of production are collectively controlled or owned and distributed collectively, and it means that the rights of the individual are subordinated and the rights of the group is placed above that of the individual's rights. Now, individualism, nowhere does it state that an individual is forced like a robot with a button to press on the back of them to go and work on their own. It's all a question of this. Do you believe that it's your own individual right to determine what you do with your own life, whether you choose to go and work on your own or work in collective groups freely as you wish? Or do you believe in forcing everybody with the same and having a state determine your life? Because that is more or less what it all boils down to. Where on this earth have you ever seen collectivism lead to the betterment of society? The most extreme form, and this is on a political scale, the most extreme form of collectivism is communism. Judging by your logic, the most advanced societies would have been communist, would have been that of communism all over the African continent, would have been communism in the Soviet Union, would have been communism in China, Cambodia, Cuba. But there again lies the problem. History contradicts you. A society that was on a scale more politically individualist, such as for example on the scale Hong Kong or Singapore to a varying degree. Isn't it funny how those societies were living better off, were living more peaceful and harmonious lifestyles? Hong Kong under strong individualism had control over their immigration up until 1997, when collectivism started interfering through the Chinese government as their lease came to an end and China took back somewhat control over Hong Kong. Isn't it funny that as soon as the Chinese government starts interfering, you begin to see a vast increase in the Hong Kong population, and they begin to see serious economic problems. That is, of course, if you understand the laws of supply and demand and why the house prices soared.